Hello. How are you guys? Can you guys hear me so far? Hi, Alyssa. Hi. Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for being here. So I will give you guys a quick little synopsis. So I think we have about 50 or so people who purchased tickets. Hi, Ruby. Not everybody will be here live. Because we do the recording. So there's a recording if you guys ever miss any sessions that you'll have access to afterwards. Hi, Jesse. So first of all, thank you all so much for being here. I love sharing this material. I love sharing this content. It's like, it makes me so extremely happy. And we're going to be going through a lot of in-depth content that will be really specific to some of the challenges that you're all experiencing. A few key things before we get, right into everything. I noticed that a lot of you that said hi are sending your messages, which is totally okay, and you're allowed to do this, but I noticed this was a barrier people ran into last time, is when you go to send your messages in the webinar chat, if you just say to all panelists, you won't be able to send your message to the whole group. And I noticed that people love to connect in these seminars. So if you go to select where it says like to under the messages, you should see a little drop down arrow, and you can type to all panelists and attendees, and that means you'll be able to conversate with everybody else who's on here attending, which you might want to do if you have questions or you want to connect over the course of the next 8 weeks. So a few key things before we dive in. Number one, all of your questions I encourage you to ask as much as you want throughout the webinar in the chat. And you can make them available to just me, which is if it's all panelists, or all panelists and attendees if you want to make them available to the entire group. And I do notice that people tend to sort of connect and bond, so I recommend sharing them with the group. All of your questions I'm going to do my absolute best to answer. I'm going to be presenting a lot of content during the next 8 weeks as well. We have people who are coming back and re-attending and doing all these different things because there's a lot of material. And so if you are in this space where you want to like relearn or learn more, we also are recording all of these, and they're going to be posted, and you'll get a send out on Mondays with the recorded webinar format in case you ever have any kind of problem. I'm glad the sound is perfect. Thank you. So if there's any kind of problem or challenge with like, oh, I have to, I have to miss this one Saturday or anything like that, you'll have access on the Monday after this is recorded. We also have a Facebook group that I will send an email link out on Monday for everybody to join. And it's so that if you don't get your questions answered in the live webinar, which for the vast majority of the time you will, but sometimes when people are like really deep into conversation, usually later into the weeks, like week 3 or 4, if we have like a really expressive group, sometimes I just won't have time to go through all the questions and all the content. So if that happens, you can post your questions in the Facebook group, and I'll be going back and checking in there every so often and just updating and answering questions. And it's a really cool place to just facilitate discussion. Ruby is in this group right now, and she's an amazing facilitator of discussion as well. So yeah, I highly encourage everybody to just post your questions there, stay engaged, stay connected. And I'm trying to think what else I have to tell you before you get started. If you have your workbook, please print it off or just like have it up on your computer. Either way is perfect. And the whole mission of this course is to be able to provide you with like really practical tools, awarenesses, insights, and just results-oriented strategies that will create lasting change in your life. So this, again, you're going to be getting a lot of learning out of this material. I try to like over provide value for everything that I do so that it's like really packed with lots of cool golden nuggets and pieces of awareness. And so because one of the primary principles you'll learn through this course is that the subconscious mind is most effectively programmed or reprogrammed through repetition plus emotion. Any of the homework that you're getting in the workbook and anything that I'm suggesting in terms of exercises, it will be very valuable if you can sit and do the work as well. So we'll be doing some of it live in the classes, and then some of it I'm going to be like, this is your homework, this is your reprogramming, go do this in the evenings or in the morning time. And to make like a ritual or a habit out of it is so important. So the amount of work that you put into doing the work on yourself during this course is the amount of reward you're going to get out on the other side. So I highly recommend making sure that you're doing all of the intense work. So here, for the next moment or so, I'm going to give you guys a quick little overview of just some of the things that we're going to be learning throughout the course. The intro is sort of posted online already, but today we're going to go into like the why behind everything. So we're going to go through a lot of, in the early stage of this course, we're going to go through a lot of the informational stuff in terms of like the reprogramming, how we get our core wounds, what our individual core triggers and beliefs are, how to reprogram these core beliefs, how to master our emotional state, how to understand what our emotions are here for, that they're these feedback mechanisms for us to be able to dive deep and create the necessary change at the subconscious level that our emotions are trying to draw our attention to. And so we're going to get all this information first about how to understand our core wounds, our core triggers, our beliefs, how to do the work and reprogram. And then in the second half of this course, over the next 8 weeks, we're going to start learning about like the specific attachment style stuff next. So what you're going to be able to do is identify and have your core wounds and your reprogramming tools. And then we're going to insert those into the things that are more specific to your attachment style. And we're going to talk about conflict communication and guilt and shame and self-esteem. And in all of those topics in the latter half of this course, you'll be able to see like, oh, hey, you know, this is my self-esteem issue, and I know the reprogramming tools to go address this. And so it'll make change at a full level a lot more simplified and easier to do, okay? So I encourage many questions and as many as possible because I think we all learn through each other's experiences and through questions. And so I am going to get into the content for today. Do any of you have any questions before I start? And if you don't, and you want to just say no, then that would be perfect. And also, if you guys want to take a moment and just introduce yourselves to each other if you feel so comfortable or so inclined. Thank you, Susie. Just when to start the workbook. Hi, Alyssa. When to start the workbook, the best time to start the workbook is going to be as I talk about it through the course. So don't worry about anything right now. Cool questions. Yeah. So don't start anything right now in terms of the workbook. I'm going to be guiding you through the workbook throughout this course. And at the end of every course, you're going to have workbook tools and materials that you have to dive into, but there's nothing needed during the time. Okay, maybe have a journal for during class to take notes. Yes, that's a great idea. The more notes, the better. You can take notes in your workbook, on your computer, whatever works. Hi, Anna. Hi, Melissa. So are there any books that I would recommend on healing anxious attachment? You know, I've read the book Attached years ago, and it's a great book. We are going to be diving like in depth to reprogramming, how this applies to the anxious attachment individual, how to communicate so that we're going to give you all the tools that you need to heal your attachment style big time. So, but in terms of books, I'm trying to think what else. The only one that was like really powerful was Attached. I've just done a lot of reading and research about attachment theory online. Maybe I'll put together like a cool little package of things to read or learn about. But you'll get oh cool. You're gonna interview Stan Tacken. I've read all of his books. Amazing. That's so cool. So I am gonna dive into a whole bunch of stuff. And thank you guys. Hi, Katie in LA for oh, and also you guys a lot of you still are hitting just to all panelists. So I'm the only one seeing the questions, which again, if that's your intention, that's totally good. But in case you want to change it to connect with everybody, you can put all panelists and attendees. Yay. Thank you, Katie. That's amazing. That is so cool. I'm not familiar with him for some reason. That's so cool. Kath here, looking forward to this. No questions yet. Perfect. Hi, Alyssa. So nice to meet you. I think there's 2 Alyssas on here. Beautiful. Writing and marketing coach in Colorado. That's so cool. Okay, beautiful. So yeah, and Moses said that would be awesome. So I will put together a whole package here. Amazing. Great. Thank you, Jesse. Hi, Mariah, 31, New Jersey. Very excited. Okay, amazing. So I'm going to keep coming back and just checking in with some of the questions and stuff and some of the shares. So thank you guys for sharing yourselves. And the more I can learn about you guys during this process, the better. Like any personal stuff, the whole intention here is for this to be kind of like a a substitute for like one-to-one time, where you can ask your personal questions and learn at the same time and have this nice kind of like mix of learning and having all your deep personal stuff answered. So I'm going to start off this course. Like what we're really going to be diving into today is a lot of like the subconscious mind and really deep like understanding of what goes on that's creating these patterns in the first place. Because with that understanding and awareness, we'll then have a much simpler time diving in and being able to reprogram some of these things that are no longer serving us, some of these really painful patterns or core beliefs, or things that are really triggering our attachment style and have essentially kept our attachment style alive all the way from childhood to our adult lives. And one of the sort of foundational principles you'll hear me mention a lot throughout this course is, trauma. When we go through trauma, whether it's attachment trauma or any other form of trauma, what actually is keeping that trauma alive is because we keep reiterating, reinforcing, and reliving that trauma on a fairly consistent basis, to the point where like those neural pathways keep reinforcing themselves. And the past is no longer here. If we went through attachment trauma at 0 to 2 years old sometimes, or in very early childhood, then it's so interesting because we can look at that and go, what are the chances that we're going to go through this all the way back then and then all the way in our adult lives? We are still recycling some of these same patterns and programs. How is that happening? And how this is happening is because we have kept the same needs that were unmet in childhood, unmet in our lives, in our current situation, in our adult lives. And so we are reinforcing that programming of a lack around needs that creates this hungering or creates some of these attachment style patterns that, again, keep staying alive. We keep telling ourselves the same stories or have the same limiting belief patterns. We have the same fears, and all these things are still programmed into us now. And that's the only way that these things can still exist all the way in our adult lives when we tend to form the foundational structure of attachment style from 0 to 2 years old. So what we're going to be able to recognize is we don't need to go in and clean up every single trauma that ever happened to us. We need to be able to isolate and identify the core patterns related to what happened to us and work to reprogram those things at the subconscious level. And that is how we heal our attachment style. And that's also how we heal any other sort of forms of trauma or really negative core wounds that we adopted from childhood. So today we're going to dive into how that all works. We're going to go through some very initial tools to get started, but today's more like a little more informational, and you'll see the next 7 weeks are a lot more, exercise based. And we're going to be doing the work to dive right in, and I'll be following up with your questions and everything in the group and the Facebook group, and we're going to get lots of sort of personalized time to work through our stuff. So I'm going to start by illustrating how this works by talking to you about the story of Amy. So Amy was a client I had years ago. Her name is not actually Amy, but I've changed her name so that I can share this with you guys. And it's one of the clearest and just more prominent stories that I think illustrates how trauma stays in our subconscious mind and what we can do about it. So Amy, just like anybody else, came into the world with a specific genetic predisposition, but as a general rule, had a pretty clear mind. She didn't have all of these programs yet to judge herself or to shame herself or to criticize or judge other people. She didn't have any low self-esteem. She didn't have any limiting beliefs about herself. And, she comes into this world and there's her mind is still, there's no internal dialogue, right? And then Amy, just like all of us, goes through the system of classical conditioning. So this is the system of punishment and reward. And most of us in this generation or around this generation, we're socialized by the same set of circumstances. There's now something called conscious conditioning, which is a little bit different. But, classical conditioning was how we were all basically socialized if you're an adult now in your life. And so what happens when we go through this system of punishment and reward is that we get punished for doing things wrong and we get rewarded for doing things right. And so we become afraid of the punishment, of course, and we become afraid of not receiving the reward because it feels like a form of rejection. Now, when we come into this world, we have only 3 biological fears. And these fears are the fear of loud noises, the fear of falling, and the fear of abandonment. So we are wired when we come into this world because we need our caregivers to survive. We are wired to come into this world and be completely dependent on them. And so we crave that attachment. That's part of our natural predisposition. And so because this is one of our only biological fears, when the socialization or classical conditioning process begins and we start getting punished or rejected, especially because this usually begins around the age of 2, it's extremely triggering for a young child. It's extremely traumatizing, honestly. And not to say that we shouldn't go through this, because we have to be socialized and learn, but I want to make sure we're not ever invalidating that we all went through a really big trauma when classical conditioning started. And there's 2 reasons for this. Number 1, it triggers this biological fear of abandonment. And so we go through this experience of feeling like rejected by our caregivers, punished, and we can't conceive of like what's going on here. Where suddenly our caregivers are rejecting us or getting angry or putting us in timeout or neglecting us or whatever it might be. And so it triggers this major fear of abandonment. And so of course we work really hard to get our caregivers' approval, because for us, their approval and our survival are very much closely related, right? If we're totally dependent on our caregivers, without them, we would literally die. When they start rejecting us, it's like, oh my gosh, we have to do anything to get approved of and to survive. And so as a species, this is why human beings are generally so deeply and have so deeply confused survival and approval. So we tend to be such an approval-seeking species because one of our earliest programs was like survival and approval sort of get confused and intertwined. And the second reason that classical conditioning can be quite traumatizing is because we come in and we're wired essentially to love unconditionally. So we get upset, we get angry, we get frustrated, but we always are like going back, and we're vulnerable and we are connected to our caregivers. And part of what the classical conditioning process does is it gives us this messaging that love is conditional, and that your love is based on how worthy you are, how good you are, or all sorts of those things. And what our brain does as it goes through this whole socialization process is it learns to create something I call emotional inferences in order to best respond to its environment. So let's say, and this is Amy's case, so Amy saw, and this is her sort of story, and I want you to all sort of relate yourselves to this and see what patterns and things you experience, and we'll dive into a lot of that anyways, but in this first section here. So Amy had a father who had a really short temper, okay? So he had a short fuse and would get angry very easily and would drink a little bit, and when he would drink, he'd get a little bit angry and sort of scary and unpredictable. And her mother was very religious, but her mother, she said, sort of shamed her a lot. So she'd be like, you're only a good girl if you're this way, or you're a bad girl if you're this, and so Amy's early childhood, she felt that, okay, I'm unsafe around my father, I'm powerless around my father, and mom makes me feel like I'm bad. And then she went to school, and her emotional inferences. So the emotional inferences are basically the beliefs we create in order to adapt and respond to our environment. So because the brain is very survival oriented, it's not really interested in your emotional happiness or your thriving, at least not at the subconscious level, maybe your conscious mind more so, but not your subconscious. What happens is, it's very interested in your survival. So if dad is angry or scary, your brain's going to go, okay, I'm unsafe around dad and I have to protect myself from dad. Remember that. And so it will keep feeding and refeeding this belief, this deep emotional inference that says, I am unsafe around dad. And then, when I'm around mom, I feel shamed, or I feel like something's wrong with me, or I feel like I'm bad. And so the brain then, because it's programmed through repetition plus emotion, holds on to these inferences quite deeply, and it keeps reprojecting them out onto our external environment. And we're going to talk about that in a few moments. So Amy goes through life. She has her mother and her father this way. She goes to school, and at school she gets bullied. And so Amy learns, her brain learns to make the emotional inference, or this belief up, that says, people don't like me and I'm not good enough. And so now Amy's collected this sort of repertoire of beliefs that say things like, I am powerless, I am unsafe, I'm not good enough, I'm bad, people don't like me, all these different things. Now there's 3 major ways we get programmed. We get programmed through what we see repetitively. So basically what's modeled to us, what we hear all the time, and then what we have firsthand experiences of. So for example, if I, see all the time my parents fighting as a child, I might learn through that behavior model to me that, relationships are about fighting, or when people have conflict, they fight. If I hear my parents all the time saying, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough money, I might learn to believe, oh my gosh, there's never enough money. There's so much lack. And when we have firsthand experiences like Amy of being bullied on the playground, we might believe, oh my gosh, people don't like me. And all these things are happening through repetition plus emotion. So I'm just checking in with the comments so far. It's so interesting that this is so much like your story, Kath. Hi, Jennifer. Is this Maho? Oh, hi, Mariah. Cool. Okay, so nice to meet all you guys. Hi, Pam. And I'm glad you guys are already chatting a little bit. It's nice. The more you share, the better. Oh, hi, Maho, you're here. So beautiful. So as we go through all of these experiences, right, we collect beliefs. So Amy's brain, so this is a real story, and Amy's brain collected all of these beliefs, right? She has a sort of repertoire. Then we have this mechanism in our brain called the reticular activating system. And the reticular activating system's job is to filter out information according to what you know. So the conscious mind, and I won't get like too technical here, but the conscious mind can basically only process a certain amount of bits per second of information. So it relies partially on the reticular activating system to filter out what's important and what's not important. So if you didn't already know this, your subconscious mind stores all memories ever. And it consolidates memories, so it can kind of blur them a little bit over time. But if you've ever been under hypnosis or anything like that, you'll notice that your brain can bring up very early childhood memories that are like very clear with all the details intact, like what color somebody's socks were in the memory, like all these things. It's because your subconscious is actually picking up all this information, but your conscious mind is only really noticing a certain amount of it because your reticular activating system is filtering a lot of this information out. And one of the ways it filters this information out is according to your belief system. So imagine this for a second. Imagine Amy. She has this belief that people don't like her. What do you think her subconscious and her reticular activating system get focused on? Well, they get really focused on all the times people don't like her. And it tends to dismiss, her filtering system tends to dismiss all the times people do like her, which means she's more likely, the beliefs we have in early childhood, just like Amy, are more likely to keep reinforcing and reiterating themselves over time because we are unintentionally and unconsciously refeeding them a lot of the time. And on top of that, we have a very survival-oriented brain. So one of the brain's roles is to consistently focus on the negative more than the positive as a subconscious strategy for connection. It's like if I can, sorry, not for connection, for safety. It's like if I can remember all the bad things that can happen and I can be hyper vigilant about all these potential bad things, I'm more likely to be able to protect myself from them. Just like as an example, if anybody's ever been in like a car accident, you can drive so safely and have so many like pleasant, positive experiences in the car for years, and then you have one negative experience, and then it's like it's hard to get back in the car again, or it's scary, or all these things can come up. So it's because your brain is for your survival going to focus on negative more than positive. And so what happens is over time, our programs tend to get deeper and deeper, and we tend to feed them more and more. And then our reticular activating system keeps working on behalf of them to keep filtering out information according to that programming. And we'll talk a little bit more about the net result of that. So Amy goes through life. She's got a bit of an angry father. She's got a bit of a shaming mother, but they mean well, they're doing their best. And she gets bullied a lot in childhood, and she thinks that her childhood isn't so bad. But when I meet Amy, and again, her name isn't Amy, but when I meet Amy, so this is quite a few years ago now, she is like in shambles. She has a hard time going outside. She has extreme anxiety. She's like been diagnosed with panic disorder and depression. And she keeps saying things to me, like when we're talking about her childhood and sort of where these programs are coming from, she keeps saying things to me like, my childhood wasn't that bad. Like it's me. There's something just wrong with me. I must have been like this forever. But what Amy's experiencing, just like any of us, is that Amy's programmed, and our conscious mind, and research proves this. Okay, we know this with certainty. The conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower the subconscious mind. It can only create new programs over time, so that the subconscious mind is basically outwilling or overpowering its own programming. So we can't take our conscious mind and then say, we're going to outwill a subconscious program here without doing it so repetitively and so intentionally over time and feeding it with specific ingredients you're going to get in this course that allow us to embed new subconscious programs so new neural pathways can fire and wire and old programs can atrophy. And so, if anybody looks at like addiction, for example, I don't know if anybody's seen somebody they know be addicted or struggle with alcohol or drugs or video games or porn or like anything. But what happens is, like, you know, sometimes people will say, oh my gosh, I want to stop so badly. I can't stop doing this. You know, it's so hard. And then they keep running up to this, like they keep hitting this wall and repeating the same patterns. And it's because unless we address creating change within ourselves at the subconscious level, it will always be a losing battle because our conscious mind will not be able to overpower our subconscious. And so this shows up for all healing. If we are not actively healing ourselves at the subconscious level, then none of our changes that we really want to see can, you know, that transformation can't deeply take place in a lasting way. So here's another thing about Amy's subconscious, just like all of ours. The subconscious also seeks familiarity. It really wants familiarity because it associates familiarity with safety. So if you have all these painful programs like Amy that say, you're not good enough, people don't like you, your subconscious goes like this, essentially. It goes, well, yeah, these things are hurting, but you know what? We're surviving, so these things are working. And that's what it's focused on. And so, you know, we tend to have these painful inferences or these beliefs we adopt from how we experience our environment in childhood. And this doesn't end at any point. This goes all through our adult lives, but the strongest and deepest ones tend to be the earliest ones. And then our subconscious works very hard to keep recreating situations that continuously make us feel this way. So if you pay close attention and do a big deep dive into your life, you might even see that some of the things that you don't like and that have been painful almost have this interesting, like, recurring theme in your life. So for example, maybe you felt trapped, helpless, and powerless many, many times, and you notice that, hey, like, even though the external environment changes, even though I feel trapped, helpless, and powerless at school, and then at work, and then in my relationship, and the external environment, or even the person I'm in the relationship with seems to change over time, the internal pattern seems to be very much the same or quite similar. And what's happening is it's really just these programs you've collected over time that your subconscious keeps working to reinforce and recreate without your conscious mind really being on board or necessarily wanting any of that. And so the net output of this is that we all basically see reality through this filter of the past. So I'll give you an analogy for this because it's quite an important point. Let's say you take two men, and let's say there's Tom and there's Bob. And let's say Tom has had really positive relationships with women his whole life. He got along really well with his mother and his sisters and had healthy romantic relationships. And let's say Bob had basically the opposite. Let's say always fighting with his mother, always fighting with his sisters, feeling betrayed in romantic relationships, lots of chaos there. And let's say you take Tom and Bob and they're supposed to go to a men's conference, and by accident, they open the door to a women's conference. And so they go into this conference room and they stand, like, let's say just a foot inside the door, and all they see is this room full of women. Well, in that moment, Tom and Bob are experiencing the exact same reality. They're both seeing this in room full of women. They're standing basically in the same place right next to each other. But what's going to happen is Bob, I forget which one I said first, but the first one who had the positive relationships to the women, is going to probably have like a positive neurochemical reaction. He's probably going to be like, oh, this is pleasant. Like, there's so many women here, and not feel stressed. Whereas Tom, or the second one with the negative romantic relationships, or relationships to women, is going to feel this like triggered feeling and maybe feel suffocated or angry or hostile or a need to protect himself. And they're experiencing the exact same reality, but we don't see the exact same reality as people. We all see reality through a filter of our previously stored experiences and programming. And so it's really difficult when we have a painful filter because we've had lots of painful experiences and we've got lots of painful programs. And then we try to go out and be in the world and do things and connect in relationships and thrive when we have this whole filter that we're constantly reprojecting our past onto our present, suffering accordingly. And then we're in this space in life where we're trying to get ahead, we're trying to do things, and we're being constantly dragged backwards by our past in our present. And so what we all need to do, and what you're going to be doing a lot of in the first couple of weeks of this course, is we need to get really clear on what our filter of reality is made up of, what all our limiting programs are made up of, what all the painful points are that we haven't let go of, and we need to be able to isolate these things, identify them, and reprogram them so we can create change, because this will change the output of all of our other experiences. So Amy, who's got this really painful reality filter, she's seeing, imagine her life. She's seeing and feeling all the time powerless and unsafe around men because she adopted that from her father and it wasn't worked on or repatterned. She feels shamed and judged and criticized by women because those were her earliest relationship sort of connections to mom. And then she feels as a general rule that she's not a likable person. Okay. So then imagine Amy going out through life and trying to do well. Well, she's not going to do well in the relationship department with people because she's going to be a little bit horrified of them because we're seeing our reality through our painful past experiences. So some of Amy's behavioral qualities when I met her were that she was hypervigilant, right? Hypersensitive to criticism, not very trusting, kind of quiet, and had really poor boundaries. And so what happens is, if you can imagine, she collects all these beliefs, and this is a really important part of this course. So I just want to be super clear about this in great detail. If you have a pen and paper, write this down. She collects all these beliefs. These beliefs create patterns of thought. So imagine that Amy believes people don't like her, and she goes into a room full of people. What kind of thoughts is she going to think? She's going to think like, oh, people don't like me, people are judging me, people are looking at me in a funny way. She's going to have all these, thoughts that are the result of that painful belief program from early. Those thoughts create emotions. Okay, so think of how you feel when you're thinking or believing those things. Belief and thoughts both create emotion. What do you feel when you're in a room full of people, imagining or assuming that everybody doesn't like you, that you're not going to connect with anybody, that people are gossiping about you, judging you? You start feeling maybe anxious or afraid or sad or disconnected, right? And the neuroscience has proven that every single decision we make is based on emotion. So even those of us who think that we're very logical, rational thinkers are creating emotionally based decisions at the tipping point, and then we're just really quick to rationalize or justify them through logic. So it's like this: beliefs create thoughts, thoughts create emotions, emotions create actions. And here's another really important point. Our emotions are made up of neurochemical reactions, okay? So if we're thinking happy thoughts and positive thoughts and we feel connected and safe and close to other people, we might, it might elicit, if we have thoughts that like, oh, I can't wait to be at this event with lots of people, and what a blessing, and I get to connect with so many people, and I love people, and I get along with people, you're going to have like oxytocin being produced, the bonding neurochemical, or you're going to have serotonin, like this well-being neurochemical, or dopamine, a little excited, a little, ready to go and motivated to connect with people. So those beliefs and thought patterns are going to produce positive emotions and thus positive neurochemical reactions. Versus if you've got a lot of, painful beliefs and thoughts, and you're like Amy and you go into that room full of people, you're going to have like some cortisol responses, some norepinephrine responses. You're going to have like not so nice neurochemical reactions that are there to put you in a state of fight or flight because you think you have to like protect and survive and figure things out from that space. And so we all have our own individual. So actually, to backtrack for a moment. So when I met Amy, she was on selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. She was on antidepressants and to fix her neurochemical imbalance. And when I say like this, it's not because I don't believe in antidepressants. I was on antidepressants when I was 14 years old. I understand, like, I'm not there. I think that they serve as the solution for a temporary period of time, but just to be super clear, these things are treating the symptoms. They're not at all treating the root levels. We don't see young babies come into the world born with depression and anxiety. There are very few things. There are some things, but very few things that people are born with. And usually they're like things like being a psychopath and your amygdala is literally physically smaller than most people's. Like, at the chemical balance or imbalance level, it's not that you come into the world with some kind of neurochemical imbalance. It's that over time we collect painful beliefs, which produce those painful thoughts, painful emotions, and this happens in a pattern because your subconscious is working to keep recreating this. And so, of course, your pattern feels very strong, and it elicits those neurochemical responses that create a chemical imbalance over time. And then, of course, we feel helpless to fix it. And of course, we say, oh my gosh, like what the heck can I do? I've tried so many things and it's not working to try to create change because your conscious mind cannot outwill your subconscious mind. So we feel like we run up against this wall, and then we're like, oh, it's just an imbalance, and let me outsource. And so again, disclaimer, like in 0% way am I saying to anybody who might be on antidepressants or some form of medication to go off. But what I highly suggest is that while you're on this medication, to work on the belief and thought patterns that are producing some of those emotions and thus neurochemical balances or imbalances, so that you can go back and create healing at the deep root level where it first existed and took place. And then maybe work with your doctor or psychiatrist or healthcare practitioner to maybe think about creating change there. So, and I've seen this a lot. Cool. Okay, so I'm just checking in with the comments for a second. I like the expression collecting beliefs. It's like collecting stamps. Yeah, we really collect beliefs. A food addict here. Yeah, so you can definitely relate to some of those challenges, right? And Melissa says I can relate to Amy so much. Wow, beautiful. Thank you for sharing this. And so, it sometimes, in my practice historically, it's been like a little bit devastating to see sometimes, because sometimes I'll see people who have lived their whole lives believing that they're just flawed and there's something wrong with them, and not being able to recognize what's going on beneath the surface to create real healing. And so Amy, when she was talking to me, and I'm just going to drink water for 1 second. So Amy, when she was talking to me, was saying things to me like I haven't been through enough for this. I haven't been through enough in my life to struggle like this. And of course she had. And that's the reality, is that with those painful beliefs, like, anybody has essentially, to be depressed or anxious. And so just imagine like some of the beliefs running, right, through that belief, thought, emotion, action pattern. So she had these sorts of patterns. She felt she was unsafe. So she had thoughts like thinking people were attacking her or judging her, or like attacking meaning like saying negative stuff about her. That would create this feeling of panic and suspicion. And her action to respond to all of that was to isolate herself and withdraw from people and hide. Or she felt like she wasn't good enough all the time because she had this really critical mother. And so she would, the thoughts that came out of that for her, and we'll all have our individual patterns, were things like, why bother? Like, why bother trying in life? And so she was constantly stunting, like some of the emotions that came out of that were like despair, sadness, hopelessness, feeling meaningless, pointless, she would say a lot. And the action she would take, right, were to withhold herself from trying new things, from having new experiences, because there was this ongoing like assumed rejection that lived in her subconscious mind. And so you can imagine like just some of these patterns, thinking she was powerless, thinking that people wouldn't like her, her relationship life was really struggling. She wouldn't expose herself to new relationships and try to connect to new people. And so all these things over time, the beliefs have a massive impact, because they make us isolate or not try or not work for our goals or not take action or not, try to have fulfilling relationships. And there's this major net impact. And then the worst part of this is that we tend to judge ourselves for this stuff. So we're like, oh, what's wrong with me that I can't make new friends? Or, oh, what's wrong with me that I can't connect to new people or have a lasting relationship? And we judge ourselves at the conscious level without recognizing that there are all these subconscious patterns that exist that are out of your control to a certain degree, until you can truly understand the relationship between the conscious and subconscious mind, and then take action to reprogram what's no longer serving you. So we are going to be doing a lot of that in the next couple classes here. So what we are doing, just like Amy, is we are reprojecting the past onto our present. So imagine that picture of Amy, and Amy is at the networking event. She's trying to meet new people, get a new job. She's trying to connect, and she believes people don't like her. So she goes in there, she thinks all these scary things, like people are gossiping with her. Nobody's going to want to talk to her, and nobody's going to offer her a job. People won't like her anyways. What's the point? And she feels all these painful things, and she withdraws, and she's basically responding to an imaginary reality based on her past experiences. And it might sound like, wow, that sounds so extreme, but we are all doing this to a certain degree, okay? And what is really valuable is for us to recognize just how we're doing that, when we're doing it, why we're doing it, and to understand our individual belief, thought, emotion, action programs, so that we can clearly isolate everything that doesn't serve in our reality filter, and then use the tools that you'll learn in the next steps of this course to deeply reprogram this stuff. okay? So we all go through trauma and we all reproject, okay? So I'm just gonna summarize this first step, and then I'm gonna take a moment, or sorry, this first set of this information, because it's kind of like new for a lot of people, and I just wanna make sure it's really clear. So I'm gonna summarize it, and then I'm just gonna check if you guys have any questions or any shares, and maybe we can just all chat for a moment, so people can share what they notice about their individual patterns so far. We're about to go through an exercise where you can deeply identify them, but in the next half hour or so. But if you guys want to share some of the things you notice about like your belief patterns or your thought patterns and how you respond emotionally to those things and how you take action accordingly, like sometimes we'll see people feel disconnected and they'll believe like, oh, people don't like me, and they feel disconnected. And then somebody was saying earlier, and I know who this was, but I'm not saying any names in case you didn't want to share in all the comments, but somebody said earlier that they were struggling with like food addiction. You know, oftentimes we'll see when people feel disconnected, they will go and eat food and sort of try to push down those feelings of being disconnected. And some of our earliest emotional associations to food are our mother's breast milk. And so we have lots of oxytocin at the time, research shows, which is the bonding neurochemical. And we we feel safe and cuddled and cradled and all these different things. So, you know, we can be in that space, and all the way later into our adult lives, we still have this association unconsciously between food and being emotionally connected and comfortable and safe. And so sometimes we can binge eat food as a subconscious strategy to get those needs met. Like we all have all these, we're going to do a whole part on that in this course about your needs and what your unconscious actions are and what needs you're trying to meet and how to update those strategies. But yeah, so as a general rule, just take a moment and you can reflect about some of your beliefs. And here's a little summary for a moment. So number one, we all make emotional inferences during childhood. So we have this, we're exposed to this environment, we assume unconditional love, and then we get conditioned, and it's scary and it's traumatizing for everybody. And I'm not saying it's wrong by any means, because, you know, we have to be conditioned to sort of survive and adapt. But maybe the methods at the time are not the best. And we make all these emotional inferences in order to adapt and survive. So if dad's scary, we say, I'm unsafe around dad, and we try to stay away from dad to protect ourselves, right? Just as an analogy. And then the subconscious mind is programmed through repetition plus emotion. So whatever we are repeatedly exposed to, or where there's a lot of strong emotion around a certain experience, it creates a program. And we get programs through three main ways that happens: through what we repetitively and emotionally see or is modeled to us, what we repetitively and emotionally hear. So if we hear, oh, there's not enough money, and it elicits an emotional response of fear, then you've got the repetition and emotion there to create a program, and our firsthand experiences. And keep in mind as well that because the subconscious, and we'll go into this a lot later, that because the subconscious mind speaks more through emotion than it does through language, if we have a lot of experiences, or if we have a lot of repetitive experiences with a strong emotional response, that's a really deep program. If we have just a lot of repetitive experiences with less emotional responses, it's going to be a more surface program. That program won't be as intense or as deeply embedded. And if we have one single time with no repetition where there's a ton of emotion, so like a car accident would be a good example, like one single time where there's tons of emotion elicited, that can just in one single moment elicit a strong enough emotional response to create an instantaneous program. But that's quite rare, okay? So those are some of the initial rules of the subconscious. I'll be going through these things so many times throughout this course that they're going to be like the back of your hand by the end of the 8 weeks. And then these inferences, all these beliefs that we make because of how we're trying to respond to classical conditioning, so like I'm unsafe, I'm powerless, people don't like me, all these things, they create this filter that we see the world through. And we are constantly, without meaning to, our subconscious mind is constantly reprojecting these old past programs onto our present experiences. Okay, so for example, like Amy, people don't like me. Okay, so I assume people don't like me, and then I literally interact with people through a filter of assuming that I'm not a very likable person, or that it might be hard to meet people, or whatever thoughts might come off of that. Unquestioned old programs create unnecessary suffering. So much of our suffering is unnecessary. There was a study done at UCLA, and I won't go into all the details, but the baseline of the study essentially concluded that 90% of how we feel about our lives is based on our subjective interpretation of our experiences, and roughly 10% is about the objective content of our lives, which means that 90%, essentially, which means that 90% of our experience of our life is based on what we're basically telling ourselves, the beliefs that we have about our lives, or subjective content, the beliefs we have, the thoughts we have, the meaning we give to things, the emotional patterns that we have that we're reprojecting. And this essentially means that up to 90% of our lives, when we're suffering, it's unnecessary suffering. And, I can attest to that as somebody who's been through a lot of pain on one end and a lot of healing on the other end, that we don't really have to suffer. Like, pain it comes from unmet needs. And pain is a normal part of life. It'll push us to grow. It'll push us to do something different. It'll push us to have that conversation, or to stretch our comfort zone a little bit. Pain is not a bad thing. Suffering is the story we tell about the pain, and it's always based on all those beliefs. Okay, so for example, and I won't get too far off track here, but for example, if a friend doesn't call you back, let's say you're somebody who's more anxiously attached, and you have a friend who doesn't call you back when they say they're going to, there might be a pain of feeling a bit disconnected, like a 2 or 3 out of 10 of like, oh, I wanted to talk to this person today. That's too bad. And you might like hurt a little over it, but that's just an unmet need. And that's like a very solvable problem. It's like, call the friend back or send them a text. Hey, I was really looking forward to speaking. When can we speak next? Like, the pain is always quite manageable as a general rule. The suffering is all these sorts of things. It's the meaning we give to the pain. It's all the, she doesn't care about me. She forgot about me. People forget about me. I'm forgotten about easily. I don't really matter that much. I'm obviously not that important to her. She's probably having fun with more friends. It's all of the stories that we make the pain mean. And those are things that are reprogrammable and changeable when we start changing our core beliefs. Okay. So does all of this make sense so far? Yay. Beautiful. Good. Okay. You guys are amazing. There's already so much beautiful engagement. Thank you so much. Okay. And I love that you guys are already sharing. I won't look at the comments for a while because I'll get super distracted by them, because I love connecting with people and I'll want to just talk to everybody instead of presenting. But I'm just looking and seeing all these really beautiful shares already. And yeah, these are powerful. So I'm just going to read, if this is okay, because it was to all panelists and attendees. This is Mariah. Okay, so Mariah shared this, and I think this is such a powerful share. So she says, for several years, I've been aware of many of my core beliefs after lots of self-help and some therapy, but I haven't been able to move past them. I know logically they might be false, but they are so deep-rooted that they are reality for me. So I'm aware that they aren't true, but they still overwhelm and control me. So Mariah, what that usually means is that there's just been a lot of repetition or a lot of emotion or a lot of both around these beliefs, which means like more surface tools, which can be really powerful and really empowering. But things like CBT or things that where we're questioning our beliefs in real time might be next to impossible for you. And that's completely okay. So what we're going to be focusing on in this course is tools that help us work through things in real time, but also tools for situations like you, Mariah, where, yeah, I like that I started reading the second part of your answer. We're going to be working on tools that you can work through painful beliefs when you're not triggered, so you can actually do reprogramming work with a specific set of tools that will help you to move through those beliefs out of real time when you're not triggered and in pain through, again, a very specific process that will target the core beliefs so that when you are triggered in real time, the triggering is less. So I'll give you an example. How a trigger works is that because your subconscious mind stores every single memory ever, and it stores it with all the emotion intact from the experience itself, what happens is when we're triggered now, it's because you're experiencing, like, let's say your emotional reaction is disproportionate to the circumstances. So let's say, I'll give a specific analogy. Let's pretend that I'm in a relationship and the person, let's just use the same example, forgets to call me back. And let's say that I'm like I feel something for the experience, but let's say I feel like 10 out of 10 angry. Okay, so I'm like so hurt, so upset, And we could go, okay, that's a disproportionate reaction. The person just forgot to call you back. Maybe that's like a 2 or a 3 out of 10, but not a 10. Well, what's happening is if I have, your subconscious is like this file folder that keeps all your emotion and all your memories. So if I have a lot of painful emotion around feeling dismissed or not cared about or forgotten about or unloved or whatever it might be, and I'm associating this experience now with that then what happens is I feel like, oh my gosh, the friend forgot or the partner forgot to call me back and I'm not cared about. And I now am living the emotion from this moment, from feeling that I am disconnected. And my subconscious goes, oh, we know what this is. And it floods all the emotion forward to try to make you respond so that you can be safe and survive. So a trigger is you living all the emotion from this moment, plus all of the previously stored emotion from all previous memories that your subconscious has collected and consolidated. And now you're experiencing this emotion in the moment, plus all the previously stored emotion at the same time, which is why sometimes when we're triggered, it can feel so strong and so hard to like work through and process. And that's why in this course, most of our reprogramming tools are not about the moment to moment stuff. It's much more about, although there is quite a bit of that too, but it's a lot about how to deal with previous stored emotion. So how to actually go deep and reprogram things at the belief level, so that what you're essentially doing is taking out, when we reprogram at the belief level and we remove some of the painful emotional associations, it's like if we have this cup full of feeling unloved, we're dumping it out ahead of time. And then when we feel unloved ever again, if there's some kind of experience, then we're only experiencing the emotion from that moment, or there's a lot less from the past through some of the beliefs that we'll go through. So I'm just looking up, and I see that somebody said, so there is something wrong with us. So definitely not. I'm not sure where that came from exactly. So, but there is something wrong with us. That's why we need to heal. Yeah, so I see where it came from. So there's not anything wrong. Like, okay, let me be really clear. So usually the core belief something is wrong with me is like a defectiveness schema, where it's like, I am defective. Like at my core, who I am is wrong. I'm a bad, defective human being. Like that's usually what I tend to see around this, something wrong with you. So if that's your belief pattern, then like I would definitely, we're going to do a lot of work. You'll see that in your workbook. It's like in the core belief part. But what the reality is that everybody goes through trauma. I wouldn't say at all that it's like something's wrong or that anybody's defective or incorrect or anything like that. I would just say that part of our human experience is to adopt painful beliefs from our past experiences to try to protect ourselves and survive. And that's really something right with all of us, because we're here to survive first and then thrive emotionally after we know that we're surviving. And so it's a very natural and instinctual response to grab core beliefs and to reproject them. And it's not that anything's wrong with anybody. It's just how we as human beings historically have adapted and survived. And we're getting to a point where we're not living in a survival-based society anymore, where we actually, some people are, unfortunately, but for the most of us in the Western world, at least, there's a lot less of that, right? And so what can happen is our brain is trying to help us and protect us, but it's not actually necessarily serving us, okay? So I hope that explains that, because that was a really wonderful question. And it's so interesting that so many of you are saying you can relate a lot with Amy. Yeah, see? Good. Okay, so yeah, look at, these are great shares. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna read some of these that are coming out from some of the core experiences that you guys have shared, just like little patterns you guys are already noticing, because they'll be so helpful to everybody. So Katie said, I didn't have a good relationship with my mother. Now I unconsciously tiptoe around every older woman at work, desperate for their approval and terrified of their criticism. So I'm going to show you how to reprogram these things at the core so they don't have to keep coming back. But like, that's such a powerful thing to notice. It was so beautiful. Wow. So Kath, you're saying there's this sort of, I know this wasn't shared with the whole group, so I won't read this one out loud, but yeah. Oh, I will say one thing. maybe, so somebody just made an interesting comment about their mother being smothering and spoiling, and the father being a scary man, and that there's this fear um, that made you more narcissistic. And it's very rare that narcissists are showing up to classes to do the work on themselves. If somebody's really a narcissist, usually we see that they resist therapy at all costs because they're too grandiose. And I'm not saying that in a judgmental way, just one of the characteristics of a narcissist, to try to work on themselves or to try to dig into their past. So, I'm sure that maybe there's traits in you that can be a little bit more selfish at times or self-oriented as a protective mechanism, but as a general rule, you probably are not anywhere near being narcissist. So I'm glad that you are able to share that, though, and thank you for sharing that. Okay, good. So some of you are sharing really cool things about that you can recognize some of these patterns, but it's the reprogramming that you're struggling with. That's good, because we're going to be spending a lot of time on the reprogramming. Yeah, and here's a really beautiful one. So I have an underlying belief that I'm not enough. I get anxious when I make a mistake, and my mind goes directly to what people think. And that can be so debilitating, right? Because if you're like so afraid to make a mistake, then we don't take risks. We don't want to expose ourselves or learn or grow or do anything like that. And so we get so locked into this space of like just trying to protect and avoid, and it can be so limiting. And then long term, we don't progress as much as we could as people because we've got this sort of invisible prison of that fear-based belief. And then it tends to reinforce, look, we aren't good enough because we're not doing all these things. And it can be so scary. So again, we're going to be doing so much work on these things. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and some of you are saying you feel desperate for approval around males and females. Yeah, because, and you were bullied in preteens. Yeah, there you go. So you see, right? Like, of course we are all a little bit desperate for approval, because some of our earliest programs were literally, in order to survive, you have to get approval from mom and dad, right? Because conditioning begins at a time when you are helpless to your parents, right? So of course we've got some of these things going on. And you'll hear me say this a lot throughout the course, but one of the most powerful things we can do is not to judge ourselves in any way for any of this, but to instead inquire, right? When we adopt an attitude of judgment, we get lost in the story of things. We want to be able to inquire and go inwards and find out, like, why are these things happening? Why am I feeling this way? And what can I do about it? Where are these things coming from? And how can I create change? So it's really, really powerful and important. Can this stuff really be healed because it sucks? Who said that? I just thought, yes, it can absolutely be healed. So I'll give you guys a 1-minute synopsis. Sorry, I'm reading some of these other comments. Kath, like, you just wrote this. Hi, if you think my share would be helpful to all, please share it, even though I only sent it to you. I was just embarrassed, but I should have shared it with everyone in case they have the same issue. So, like, here you are already thinking about other people and how you can help and be of service. And like, that's so the opposite of so I'll share this. Kath was saying she's worried that she became narcissistic from her mother smothering and her dad being emotionally unavailable and kind of scary. And Kath, I had a similar emotional upbringing, honestly, and I'm for sure very more polarized to like being empathic and empathetic and caring than narcissistic. And I see tons of people with this upbringing that, as a general rule, come to care more about other people's feelings than their own sometimes, and they usually have to come back into balance. So even you making that comment is like the opposite of a narcissist. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was so beautiful. So okay, there's so many amazing comments in here that I want to touch on. So I'm going to spend 5 more minutes on comments, and then I'll go back into content again. So a couple other really cool things. So Melissa said, can this stuff be healed because it sucks? So if any of you know a little bit about my history, I was depressed and anxious and in and out of rehab for my mid to late teens. And I was addicted to painkillers after surgery and all kinds of stuff. And I was probably as far down one line of being unhealed and sort of being in a really chaotic place in life. And how I came across a lot of this work and found it and researched so much is because I was like absolutely desperate to heal. And I had tried so many things, talk therapy and rehab and and so many things that weren't working. And it wasn't until I understood that, like, okay, it's actually the subconscious mind that needs to be engaged in the healing process, that I was able to find like real and true healing. So 100% this actually works. And it does suck, I know, when you're going through it, but it absolutely works. And I can very much say that if you're committed to your self-work, if you're committed to your process, that you don't have to suffer. Like, you can have pain like any other human being. Like, hey, you know, I feel a little disconnected from somebody, and that's a need that it's letting me know, or I feel behind in one area of my life and I want to catch up there. But pain is always manageable. Suffering is all the stories, all of the programs, all that stuff, and we can rewire all of that if we're committed to doing the work. It does take a certain amount of repetition, and it does take a certain amount of consistency, but really, really absolutely changeable stuff. So I don't get how there is nothing wrong with us when there is, because we have to heal and reprogram. So everybody has to heal and reprogram. Like, everybody is going to go through trauma, so everybody has to heal from that trauma. And what I'm saying is that it doesn't make you defective as a human being. It doesn't mean that like something's wrong with you at your core. It means that your subconscious mind is working well to try to keep you safe, which is part of its function. And your reticular activating system is doing its job, and all these parts of you are just working together to try to keep you adapting and safe in the world that you've lived through. So it's not that there's something wrong or defective about you. In fact, it's like very effective about you, because it's kept you surviving and adapting all this time. But I'm saying that everybody goes through pain and stores that pain. And I would definitely say that that's not wrong. I would say, or defective. I would say it's part of our biological process and how we're programmed, and it's everybody. So I would say everybody's gone through pain or trauma, and everybody should, you know, it's in their best interest at least to go through and heal and reprogram that pain. But it's very far from like being defective. Alyssa also says, we are causing the repetition. No? Yes, you are causing the repetition. Great insight. So I just want to touch on that point for another moment, which is that there are no idle thoughts. So, you know, every thought is either, and on a very, very micro, small scale, but thoughts are either refeeding our painful programs or deprogramming them at almost all times. So for example, let's pretend that I feel trapped, helpless, and powerless in childhood. And let's pretend that I'm stuck in traffic going to work. And let's say I'm like, I'm so trapped, I'm helpless, and I'm refeeding this. Like, oh, I'm stuck here, there's nothing I can do. And I'm refeeding that program with thoughts and beliefs. I'm actually firing and wiring that same neural pathway or that same neural network, and it's embedding it more and more over time. So we are recausing the repetition to a certain degree. Again, just because our subconscious mind is trying to make us aware of all the things that can go wrong so it can protect us. So these are just wonderful shares and questions. Yeah. Oh my goodness, Brad. Yes, like this will absolutely create an attachment core wound and program. And there's probably, I'm abandoned, I am unloved, I am alone, people can't be trusted, a lot of things like that. And so we really want to program these in our adult lives big time. And I'm sorry to hear that you went through that. And so what happens, right, is that our subconscious reprojects all the potential of those things happening. But imagine this, and maybe a lot of individuals with anxious attachment can really relate to this, but you know, when there's some kind of abandonment wound in early childhood, what tends to happen? Well, we get so afraid of somebody abandoning us that we try to be hyper vigilant about controlling and staying connected and controlling the connection in a relationship. And oftentimes that accidentally or incidentally pushes people away. And then it reinforces the wound of abandonment, right? Or, you know, for myself, I was a fearful avoidant, and you know, I couldn't trust people, right? I had all these trust things from my childhood. And so I would reproject in my early relationships that, oh, people can't be trusted. And I would accuse people of things. And you know, of course that pushed people away over time. And then people would end up doing things that weren't trustworthy because they didn't trust that I trusted them, and I was pushing them away. And so a lot of our painful programs become self-fulfilling prophecies. So these are great questions. So Kim, hi Kim, says, how long does it take to reprogram a belief? We're going to dive all into this in the second half of this. There's not a finite answer. but based on the different tools we have, there's different general time blocks. So I'm going to go through all of that. Really cool question. And you'd like to figure out your core beliefs. To struggle with choosing partners for addiction. So here's another thing. You guys are amazing. Okay, so there's so many great pieces in here. And yes, Alyssa, exactly. You're hitting the nail on the head here. That's your belief pattern. Then we cause the repetition. Yes. So Anna, I'm going to read this because it's shared with everybody. So I'd like to figure out my core beliefs around why I kept choosing partners who have addiction. I know part of it's this familiarity of childhood. My brother is an addict, but I'm not clear on what I'm believing. So this is a really powerful example, and we're going to dive in just a moment to all the core belief stuff. So number one, number one, your subconscious wants to maintain its comfort zone. So what it's exposed to a lot in childhood, it's like, ooh, this is what love is. Like if love from mom and dad was criticism, then your subconscious is likely going to be attracted to a critical partner in your adult life, because it's like, oh, these are our earliest programmed associations for what love is. Now, if mom and dad were not, so it's also possible, of course, under that umbrella, that pretense that because your brother was an addict, you felt that, being around an addict is a comfort zone and that's what you're attracted to. Now, what it can also be, and maybe I should say this for later, but what it can also be is it's what you felt in childhood. It's what you came to believe about yourself in childhood. So if you believed that you were unworthy of love because mom and dad were not giving you a lot of love, or because they were always making their love for you conditional, they never just were like emotionally attuned to you, but instead they were like, did you do this? Oh, okay, good girl, and you get love. And oh, did you do that? You didn't? Oh, bad girl. And so there's this consistent reinforcement that love is conditional. Then we might think that you might go through life and think I'm unworthy of love. And then you're going to attract people who are not healthy a lot of the time, because you feel like there's less of a chance of them leaving you if you're more anxiously attached. Or you're going to go through life and you are going to attract people who make you feel those same things again. So, because it's the beliefs that are trying to maintain their comfort zone and the thought patterns. So, for example, an addict, being with an addict or emotionally unavailable person might reinforce that, hey, in fact, you are unworthy of love. Does that make sense? So it's this sort of combination of factors, but we're going to get into all of this. I love this. Thank you so much for sharing this, Ruby. Just like opening up here and everything. 3 months old. Wow. So a few of you, listen, I'm just going to, Kim and Brad, if you guys want to connect, you guys have a very similar upbringing. And I think you'll connect a lot more over this course. No pressure either to share all that, but you've been through some similar things, and yes, it'll create these abandonment wounds and all these different things. So Alyssa says, and if you have a chance to explain why CBT wouldn't work for Amy, which me and most of us are, so the reason CBT doesn't work for Amy, or the reason that CBT doesn't work in general for some people, is A, because CBT targets the thought level and not the belief level, so it doesn't go all the way to the root. And B, because sometimes when we're just working with a thought, but the beliefs are so strong, the thought in real time we can be so overpowered and so overwhelmed with emotion that we get stuck there and we hit a wall, because even though we want to work through the thought pattern or the oh, somebody doesn't care about me or things like that, we have to be able to go way deeper than that and work on the belief, because the beliefs can elicit an emotional response, and so does the thought. So if your painful belief is eliciting such a strong emotional response, and then you only try to address it at the thought level, which is the general rule, elicits less strong of an emotional response, then you're going to have this belief that's like 10 out of 10 strong, and this thought that's 4 out of 10 strong, and your belief will keep trumping your thought. And so because CBT is very much related to the thought level, we can hit that wall there. So I hope that makes sense. That was a really good question. Okay, so I'm a lot of questions behind right now. I want to just, you guys have amazing questions. And amazing comments. So a couple of you said, can you share the Facebook group link? Yes, I'm going to put it, because I don't know what the Facebook group link is by heart. It's like all these funny letters and numbers. So after today, I'm going to put it in an email to everybody who's here so you can ask all the questions in there because you have so many questions and connections already. The name of the group is Emotional Mastery and Attachment Course, but it's a closed group, so it's private except for people. Yeah, it's a. Thank you guys. And Alyssa, I did do NA a couple times. And it's very limiting in a lot of ways. I'm sorry that you had bad experiences. I didn't have really good experiences there either myself. Okay, you guys are amazing. So I just want to talk to all of you individually and go through all these amazing shares. So now we're going to go into some how to actually find these programs. Okay, so week 2, so next week we'll be doing a lot of the like heavy duty. It's just about reprogramming. But for today, we're going to go into like how to really find these core programs and beliefs that exist in the first place. Okay, so number one, I just want to be super clear that like we're always bringing the stuff from the past into the present. I think you guys really get that, it looks like, from the comments and stuff. So here's how these programs stay alive, right? We can have this trauma when we're 6 years old, and then we can be 36 years old and we're still reliving the same feelings and thoughts and beliefs and actions and all these different things, right? And it's because over time we keep recreating it, we're feeding it, we're still firing and wiring that same set of programs, and we're basically recreating, and you'll hear me say this a lot, BTEA, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, actions. Okay, so it's like BT, we're creating the BT on autopilot. So because we're consistently reprojecting the past, feeling accordingly, taking action accordingly, and then reinforcing the same pathway. So this is how our trauma stays alive. And if you pay close attention, a lot of the internal dialogue patterns you experience from mom and dad, a lot of the internal dialogue patterns you experience are largely, not all, because there's many other factors at play, but a lot of them will reflect how mom and dad spoke to you at painful times in your life, or how sisters spoke to you, or brothers, or teachers, authority figures, coaches, kids at school. Like a lot of your internal dialogue throughout the day is actually you still repeating some of that painful programming. So a lot of us who had really critical parents, guess what you're doing? You're criticizing yourself a lot in your internal dialogue. Or if you felt that somebody was shaming you a lot, that you were defective or wrong, we tend to be doing those same things, right? And then we've got all these unconscious coping mechanisms that we use to try to save ourselves from that pain, when really we are unconsciously, without meaning to, creating some of that pain in our present lives because of those stored past experiences. So we're sort of living in this echo of our past, spilling into our present through our subconscious mind. And you'll even see like your greatest unmet needs from childhood. A lot of time you are not meeting yourself in your adult life, or you're still robbing yourself of getting met. So as an example, a lot of individuals, I was speaking to somebody earlier, and he was really emotionally neglected in childhood, and he couldn't express his feelings and needs at all. He felt like they were shamed or judged. So this man who was, quite successful in his life, and had lived this whole life, he was still really struggling in the relationship department, and he's close to retirement and really struggling in maintaining a relationship, because every relationship he got into, he was still recreating this pattern of never expressing his feelings and needs. So he would get into a relationship, give, please, 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 and then consistently not express his feelings or his needs. And so he would get exhausted from the relationship and go hide and retreat and try to protect himself from giving all of his emotional energy away. And then he'd feel resentful towards his partner and frustrated. And he didn't even realize that he was just recreating the same patterns at the action level. Like, oh, my needs aren't met in childhood to be heard and seen and understood and expressed. And so it's, okay, let me just keep recreating those patterns in my adult life. So we tend to keep recreating these things. And that's, it's a little disheartening to hear that, but it's also really powerful and amazing, because it means if we are recreating those things, it's also in our power to get our needs met again, or to take our power back and to create change. Yeah. Ruby, you are so beautiful. You're on a journey here with all your beautiful comments. Beautiful. Okay. So I hope that this is all making sense so far. And you guys are asking a lot of really cool, yeah, Alyssa, there's so many things I just want to chat with you guys about. Okay, so this is all making sense. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, sometimes people really struggle with CBT. I'm just looking at some of the comments again for a moment. So cool, cool, cool. Yeah. So a lot of these beliefs, right? Like, oh, I'm unlovable. It can be so, yeah, unless I prefer it. Hi, Susan. So good to see you here. I didn't even see your, I think it's the Susan that I know. So good to see you. So yeah, yeah. So exactly. Things like I'm unlovable. We can have these really painful core beliefs. And they keep getting reprojected, keep getting reprojected. Okay. So thank you guys all so much for just sharing everything so far. It's so beautiful to hear all these shares and to see all this stuff. So, okay, so we have these seeds that we basically had planted a very long time ago, and we keep watering them without meaning to on autopilot. And again, it's not our fault. This is not something wrong or defective. This is just our brain trying to keep us safe and try to, hey, like all these bad things could happen that you've experienced in the past. Project the potential possibility of them recurring and protect yourself accordingly. Like it's all coming from a well-natured and well-intentioned place. But then, of course, the big challenge is that the net impact of that is really scary, because we'll just keep replaying these patterns almost our whole lives unless we're really digging into what they are and creating change. So I want you to take a moment and just externalize the relationship to yourself for a moment and just reflect. So think about if the way you speak to yourself, how you treat your needs, and how you treat your emotions. I want you to think about if somebody outside of you was treating you that way or responding to you that way or talking to you that way, how would that person make you feel? Okay. And in there, you might even see traces of, oh gosh, that voice in my mind sounds like my mom, or, sounds like my father, or the way my mother treated my needs, I'm treating my needs now, or the way my siblings treated my needs, I treat my needs now. If I was the caretaker of everybody, all of my siblings, then I might have this natural tendency to disown my own feelings and needs and make it about everybody else all the time, which of course is going to go to create, like, what conflict is a perception of imbalance. So I'm going to, have this perception of imbalance between, my how people treat me and how I treat them, and it's going to create this inner resentment, or, is likely to. So we have a tendency to speak to ourselves like we've been spoken to, treat our emotions like they were treated, validate them or invalidate them, treat or acknowledge our needs like they were treated or acknowledged. And so a good question you can ask yourself in this, like, second part of this reflection here is, what did you need from mom and dad? How did you want them to speak to you? How did you want them to treat your emotions? And and then ask yourself, how can I give this to myself now? Because part of, like, reparenting or reprogramming and healing is literally having this awareness that though we've been unconsciously watering these painful seeds for a very long time, that we have the capacity to put an end to it and to start doing the opposite, which will then bring us into that space of healing. So trauma and emotional pain can start to end when you stop watering these painful seeds and begin planting new ones. Okay, so here's an initial exercise. Okay, number one, if you open your workbook, so you'll see you've got your workbook, and on the first page, it'll actually say page 2 because you've got, like, your cover page. You'll see all of these goals, and so I like to call this the sweep. So what you can do when you have a moment, and this isn't right now, I'm just explaining these exercises for later as we go on to the second part of the material for today, is go through all of these 7 areas of life. This is a diagram I found. I personally like to separate these areas differently. So if you look at the diagram, it's like family, spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, social, career, financial. I like to go spiritual, mental, emotional as 2 separate categories, because mental is like learning, growth, studying. It's very, like, intellectual. Emotional is really about, like, feeling your feelings, connecting to your feelings, understanding them. There's an emotional component to human beings. Physical, career, financial, and then relational, because relationships are not just family and social, they're family, social, friendships, romantic relationships. There's all sorts of stuff in there. So go through the 7 areas of life, not in this very moment, but write down all of the goals that you have. And then next to it, and this is one way, so these exercises are about finding your core beliefs. So one way of finding the core belief is to, next to, in the second part of the exercise, part B, next to these goals, I want you to ask yourself, like, what are your like buts? What are your places of resistance or fear? So let's say, for example, that your goal is to see your family more, okay? And then you ask yourself, well, what do I fear about seeing my family more? And you might say, oh my gosh, my mother's so overbearing, or they'll be criticized by my father, or all these sorts of things. So you want to find like what your buts are. And these are giving you some more of your surface level beliefs as opposed to your core beliefs. You can also ask yourself, why haven't I accomplished this goal yet? And you might say, oh, I want to see my family more, but I don't have enough time. And you'll see, like, your whatever follows your butt is a limiting belief that lives in your psyche. Okay, so that's one like really simple, really sort of like high level way to pull up core beliefs. Then on your second page, okay, where it says take inventory, you've got all of these major components of things that impact our lives. So this is on page 3 is the page number of your workbook, and you'll see it says like men, women, relationships, marriage, commitment, yourself, your needs in a relationship, your partner, all these different things. And I want you to ask yourself, what painful stories do I tend to tell around here? So I'll refer to in this course a lot our stories as basically our patterns of thought and belief. Okay, so this is more like an observation exercise. I want you to like reflect on this throughout the week if you can. So notice in your internal dialogue as much as you can. Like, what are you saying about men? What are you saying about women? Like, and sometimes we'll hear things like, oh, men are predatorial, or, you know, women are all catty and untrustworthy, or, you know, we have all these like really painful things that live inside of our mind, and they just come from painful experiences or fears, and can come from like repetitive exposure to the media, repetitive exposure to a friend or a loved one who was very negative, you know, or maybe mom said lots of negative things about men, or dad said lots of negative things about women. Like, they come from any place that we got repetition plus emotion. And so we want to start becoming aware of these things, and then we really want to take a look and at how these things impact us. So I'll give you an analogy. I had a friend once, and I tell this story, it's an old story, but I had a friend who, we were at lunch once, and she had a lot of really limiting beliefs about men. And we were like middle of the day going for lunch, and this man came up and held the door when we were walking in, and she like looked at me and she's like, oh, men. Like, she made this like derogatory comment. And it was sort of like, I remember, you know, I had been doing a lot of self-work already and a lot of healing, and I was in a really good space. And I remember thinking like, wow, what a like painful thing that you know, somebody holds the door and does something nice, and right away you have to take it like that. Like, what a painful thing. And I had chatted with her about trying to do, you know, some work and stuff many times, like, oh, you should work on yourself, or, you know, but it wasn't really her thing. And so you can ask yourself, you know, what's worse in life, to have this painful belief that like a man can't be trusted, and to live your entire life thinking and feeling and believing that way, and never having like a whole relationship, never trusting in a relationship, never feeling like you can completely open and be vulnerable and be yourself. And then, you know, that, or loving and being open-hearted and having beautiful experiences and connecting and feeling safe and good in relationships, and then something bad happening at some point and getting hurt. You know, I would always choose the second way. I would always rather live fully, love fully, and expand and experience and get hurt sometimes, than to live in a space of perpetual hurt where I continuously hurt myself through my negative stories, my limiting beliefs, the things I'm telling myself. And this isn't like a substitution for caution. Like, we have to be reasonable, and we have to be aware of red flags, and we'll have to do this. But our mind is naturally going to do this, because our mind is designed to do this, whether we like it or not. So we really want to take care of any really painful, non-equilibrated programs that are pushing us constantly to see all the pain. And we want to come out of that and deprogram some of these things. And we already naturally have our state of caution. And we'll talk a little bit about in this course, like what some red flags are and what to be aware of in communication and in attachment styles. And you'll have some awareness of that from this course too. So it's a really great exercise to take the week to just reflect and take inventory on all these core areas of your life, okay? And it's just like, this is again part of like finding your perceptual filter of reality and starting to notice like what really exists in my subconscious mind here that I keep reprojecting. And so the exercise on page 3 to 4 is just about you really evaluating the cost of those painful programs, okay? So I'm going to check in and see if this makes sense. And then I'm just going to go into how to find core beliefs in a moment. So we can really go through like how to take our painful thoughts and then go all the way back to our core beliefs, because we are going to start deeply, deeply reprogramming at that level. Hi. Yeah, so nice to see you on here, Susan. I changed my number a little while ago because I was getting so many calls off the internet from putting up YouTube videos and stuff. So I'll share some of that information with you after the class today. Thank you. And it's so nice to see you and would love to see you as well. So thank you both. Yeah, you guys are doing such a beautiful job in here of just sharing and connecting and going through all of these things. Can't wait to do something new. Okay, beautiful. So does this all make sense so far? That like, all the way from the beginning, here's how you get your beliefs. Here's how we keep recreating them. Here are how we treat our needs. It's all a reflection of some of the early programming we got. And that's, we have to, our first step to healing is like deep awareness. So we have to go into our filter and like see everything and find everything and sweep through all the areas of our life to start finding like what's going on inside of us that we're reprojecting, so we can start creating major change. Does that all make sense so far? Amazing. Okay, good. Thank you. Hi, Jen. PFL, what is your name, if you feel comfortable sharing? The underworld. I like that, Ruby. Pam. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to remember. Hi, Pam. So here's what we're going to do next, okay? We're going to learn how to find a core belief. So this is, it's okay. So here's how to find a core belief. So number one, when you have an experience emotionally, so we know that we have BTEA, right? So we know that when we're at the emotional part of an experience, that we are, so there's 2 reasons that we feel emotions, okay? Reason number 1 is because we have an unmet need, and in that case, it's gonna be more of like pain. And number 2 is we've got like some really painful core wounds or core beliefs or thoughts activated or triggered, which is producing that suffering feeling, okay? So pain is the unmet need, suffering is the story and the meaning we give to the pain. So think of it this way. So when we look at emotions and like what emotions are, so emotions are neurochemical reactions. Actually, let's look at this way instead. If we look at hunger, what is hunger? Hunger is a neurochemical reaction. It's created by the hunger and fullness neurochemicals, leptin and ghrelin. It creates a visceral response in the body, and it's feedback to go fix a problem, okay? So what happens? You get the visceral response in your body, like the rumbling or the emptiness or whatever it might be, and it's feedback, like, hey, go eat food. You have to, replenish or survive or whatever it is. So hunger works in our favor. It's there as a feedback mechanism to help us. And our emotions are the exact same thing. Neurochemical reactions, right? Let's say we have positive thoughts, we have dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin if we're feeling bonded and close to other people, right? So neurochemical reaction creates a feeling in the body, a visceral feeling. If you pay close attention, all emotions are a reflection of the mind and the body. So if I'm thinking really sad thoughts, I'll start feeling like a ball in my throat and sinuses, pressure there. Or if I'm feeling afraid and I'm thinking, of scary things or, something like that, I'll feel like that pang in my gut or feel like this chill on the back of my neck. So all emotions are actually creating visceral sensations in your body. Neurochemical reactions, visceral sensations, feedback to fix a problem. They're the exact same thing. But we spend a lot of our lives going, oh my God, it's your fault I'm hungry. You made me hungry. And we're not recognizing, which is so disempowering, that our emotions are our emotions. They are ours to fix. And our instinctual emotional response, although it's been conditioned to like go outwards, like, oh, that person hurt me, I'm gonna get angry at that person. our instinctual emotional response we really want to condition through repetition plus emotion, through continuously connecting and checking back. We want to recondition ourselves to go inwards. When we feel bad emotion, it's because we either are running those painful stories or we have deeply unmet needs. And no matter what, it's up to us to connect to ourselves first, to understand what is going on beneath the surface. So then we can either undo the story or reprogram the belief, or understand what the need is and come up with effective tools to properly either express it to somebody else or to meet it ourselves. And if we master that set of things, right, then that set of options essentially, then we master our emotional state, because our emotion is the effect of those things not being solved. Okay, so I hope that makes really clear sense. Does that make sense? I just want to check. And we're going to talk a lot about needs in a moment. Yeah, so let me just read these questions for a second. So Thais, I was triggered. Sandy, hi Sandy. By something the other day. I remembered you said that when we're in a triggered moment, all of the activity in our brain goes into the emotional part of the brain. The logic part of the brain is not activated. I tried the activity you mentioned when triggered. Think of where you feel the pain and allow my brain to light up. Oh, cool. And it will allow my brain to light up the logic, and it worked. I was able to think more clearly and calm down. Okay, thank you so much for saying this. Good. I'm glad to hear that, Max and Anna. So I'm actually going to read this for a second, and then I'm going to give the context of this, because this is a conversation. So Sandy said, Thais, I was triggered by something the other day. I remembered you said that when we are in a triggered moment, all of the activity in our brain and the emotion part of our brain is not activated. I tried the activity you mentioned. When triggered, think of where you feel the pain and allow my brain to light up the logic area, and it worked. I was able to think more clearly and calm down. So here's something really cool about this, okay? Research shows, when we're talking about, I'm going to explain what Sandy meant, because it was a really thoughtful, insightful comment. So when we are emotionally triggered, what happens, and I'll actually give the study. So there was a study done, and researchers took participants and they put them into fMRI scanners, and they asked the participants to recall really painful incidents in their lives where they were like really triggered. So for example, they said like, oh, tell me about a really painful memory from childhood, or the death of somebody that you lost. And what they would find when they're doing this scan is they would see that if we have these three areas of our brain, that if you look at the brain from the top down, it sort of looks like they're separated into these three major areas. So it's like your reptilian brain, and it's like the most primitive and earliest formations of brain structure, and connected to the brain stem, which connects to the spine and everything. So we have the reptilian brain, then we have the limbic system, which is like sort of all the emotional centers of the brain, the hedonic highway. It's like where we experience a lot of pain and pleasure. And then we have our neocortex, which is like where a prefrontal cortex exists, and it's sort of the logical thinking aspects of the brain. And so what researchers found when they put participants into these MRI scanners and asked them to recall painful memories is that brain activity would start to shut down in the logical thinking parts of the brain. It would almost like, if you can imagine a brain scan with all these little red dots, the red dots started like going out of the logical thinking aspects of the brain, the neocortex areas, and started getting really focused in on like the reptilian brain and emotional centers, the limbic system. And so researchers were like, oh my goodness, like this is crazy. So they got participants to then witness their emotions and label them. And we're going to talk a lot about this in the next 2 weeks, like a lot. But they got them to just witness and label the emotions. So say what they were feeling and where they experienced it in their body, because emotions, like we were saying, are somatic sensations. They're the reflection of your thinking or unmet needs in your body. So they asked participants to say like, hey, I feel angry. I feel anger in my chest or my stomach or my arms. Oh, I feel afraid. I feel it in my guts. Oh, I feel sad. I feel it in my throat or my sinuses. And they got them to just do that. And right away, brain activity showed in these scans that it lit back up in the neocortex again. Because what they were doing is they were bringing their logical thinking mind into these areas of the brain, into the limbic system, and interacting with them and then lifting them back up again. So I hope that makes sense. And it's a really powerful first step that we're then going to, use for so many other things. So you really want to get in touch with like what your when you're feeling triggered, what your emotion is and where you feel it in your body. And it's also a great grounding trick because it actually reassociates you to your body. If you are looking to find what the emotions are that you're experiencing, on page 4 of your workbook, you have a bunch of major emotions and the opposites. It's not all of them, but it's like the vast majority of them. And they're opposites. So start connecting there. Start like connecting and seeing what those emotions are. And so again, your emotions are your emotions, which is such an empowering thing because it means that you can fix and change them when they're hurting you, when they're not serving you. And again, we're going to go into so much of why. So I'm just going to answer one more question here because it looks like this is important. So this is Jessie. Hi, Jessie. I have a question. I'm easily emotionally triggered when reading a book or watching a movie. Is there any linkage between these emotions and the subconscious wounds? So I can also identify my patterns through those moments. Okay, so this is actually perfect. I'm going to answer this question through this next part of the exercise. So here's what I want you all to do, and this is how you're going to find a core belief, okay? I think this is in the next page. Okay, so you'll see this on page 5 of your workbook, but just pay attention to what I'm going to say right now because we're going to go through it in sort of like a dynamic way, and then you can go back and use the workbook as a way to reconnect this. So here's what happens when we are triggered and we want to find the core belief. So we have the BTEA, right? We've got beliefs, which turn to thoughts, which turn to emotions, which turn to unconscious actions or actions in general, because we tend to make emotions or decisions emotionally based. So we have this whole pattern. We have emotions. Okay, we get this emotional trigger. There are almost always 2 reasons why you're emotionally triggered. One being the beliefs and thoughts, the other being unmet needs. We're going to park the unmet needs for now because our needs are not even relevant until we work through the beliefs and thoughts first, until we work through the stories. Here's why. Let's pretend I'm triggered. And let's pretend I'm really triggered and let's say somebody that works for me steals something, okay? Let's say I'm so mad, and I really wouldn't be that mad, but let's pretend I'm so mad, right? And let's say that I'm really angry and I'm telling this story like what would I say? Like maybe I would say, I can't trust people. People are going to steal all the time. I can never work with people. My whole business is going to be ruined, whatever it is, right? So let's pretend all these painful stories come out. When I'm telling those really painful stories, I might think that my need, because I'm so triggered, right? We've got the pain of the unmet need, and then the suffering is all the meaning we give to that pain. And so I might think when I'm in that headspace that, oh my gosh, my need is to yell at the person, is to like key their car, to, whatever it could be. So because I'm so in my suffering that my suffering is not going to communicate a healthy need to me. It's not going to be like, oh, you need to have a conscious conversation and ask why and understand it and set boundaries. Like, it's going to be like, you need to do something destructive, right? Because we're in so much suffering. And when we're in a desperate space, human beings do desperate things. So, and maybe there's all these unresolved beliefs that were activated, right? So we want to be able to work through the story first, okay? And I'm not going to teach you that right now or today, but just to give you the high level overview, we want to work through the story first. And then we want to go into, okay, and what are the unmet? Now we want to go into the needs. So if I work through the story and I realize like, okay, not everybody's going to steal from me forever. And my business is not going to be ruined because this one thing happened, or, I work through the story and there's reprogramming stuff we can do for that, but I'm not going to go into it right now. Underneath that, then I can be like, okay, so what is my need now when I just have like the pain of the experience instead of all of the suffering from the stories I'm telling about the experience? And what I might find is that the need is to like go have a conscious conversation or go initiate something and go say like, listen, why did this happen? What's going on? I want to understand, and then know how to appropriately respond, whether it's to, fire the person if I think they could cause harm to other people, or if it's to, just set a really strong boundary and give them another chance. Like, it's going to be in this space, fully dependent on when I work through my story. Okay, so we're not going to go into needs today because we're going to work through this whole process like very progressively. So right now, and to give you just a like set of steps so you can see them really clearly, we're about to go through how to find our core beliefs when we're emotionally charged. And then we're going to use these things to do a whole bunch of reprogramming stuff in the next week or so. And then you're going to learn from this whole equation what your entire like personal set of beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and actions are that are no longer serving you in your filter. And then we're going to go through how to work through the stories and then how to understand your needs underneath them. Okay, so right now we're just going to focus on the core belief patterns, but this is how you find what the core beliefs are. So let's say that an experience happens, and I just want you to reflect on something personal here, and you might want to write down a time that you were recently triggered. And then I want you to ask yourself, what did I make that situation mean? Okay, so I'm going to give you an analogy for this. So I was working with this couple once, and the woman was extremely angry. This is a long time ago, but it's a very clearly illustrated example. She was extremely angry. She was so mad because the laundry was left on the floor. And she was like, literally, this woman was like in my office. She was shaking. Her face was red. She was like, I hadn't even seen somebody in my office that angry before. And she's just mad about the laundry on the floor. And I look at her husband, and I see her husband just like shrinking. Like as she gets more angry, his body language is like so defeated and sad. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like here's, this woman who's enraged, and here's this man who's like devastated. And there's no way these two human beings are this upset about clothes on a floor. Like there's no way. And so I asked her, I'm like, so what do you make it mean when he leaves the clothes on the floor? She goes, well, he doesn't respect me because I've asked him so many times and he's disrespecting me. And I asked him, I'm like, and what do you make it mean when she starts getting angry? And so upset about this. And he goes, well, she must not love me very much because I try to do so many things for her and I make this one mistake and it's as if she doesn't even care about how I feel or the whole relationship. So here are two people fighting about feeling disrespected and unloved. And they're trying to solve the conversation by discussing the clothes on the floor, right? And so we spend our whole lives doing this really, and we get mad about the cupboard, or we get mad about the person being 5 minutes late, or we get mad about the phone call not returned, or we get mad about all these surface level things, and it's never the surface level that we're suffering over. We're suffering over our internal realities, deeper meaning that we've assigned to that thing happening. And you can think of it this way, like why do clothes on a floor make one person 10 out of 10 in rage, and another person, they're like, oh, no big deal, neutral. The husband's like, it's just clothes on the floor, it's not a big deal. Well, it's because it's not about the clothes on the floor. It's always about the meaning we are giving to these experiences. And this is such a profound truth that there's even a tribe in Southwest Africa. They're called the Satia tribe, Satiyaa, if you ever want to look it up. And they truly believe that this is the underworld, this is hell. And so according to their beliefs, when people are pregnant or born, they basically have funerals. They have like these grievance ceremonies. And when people die, they have like these celebrations. And there's this footage of a woman. I saw it on I think it was like a National Geographic thing or something, but there's this footage of a woman and her mother just died. And this footage is being taken, and they're having this like celebration that the woman died. And her daughter gets interviewed, and she doesn't speak English, but they have like a translator. And you see like pure joy in her daughter's eyes. Like she's smiling and she's beaming. And I swear her eyes were like sparkling. Like she was truly happy. And it's crazy because, we think of this and we're like, oh my goodness, like that scares me to think about. And so, we have, it's such a taboo thing, but it tells you like the profound power of our beliefs and of the conditioned meaning that we're giving to our experiences. And when we don't surface this, when it's just sitting in our subconscious and we don't even know exactly what it all is and what it's all made up of, when we don't bring it to the conscious level and understand it or reprogram what's not working or question some of it or any of these things, really that conditioned programming is just running us. It has total power over us instead of us having the power to change things, the power over it. So our first step to really finding out why an experience is triggering us, what it is that's in our realities that's happening, is to, when you experience a painful emotion, to witness and label it. A step one, okay, what emotion is it? Where do I feel it in my body? Okay, notice it, right? So, and when you ask yourself, where am I feeling it in my body? It forces you to notice it. So maybe you feel anger and you feel it in your chest or your arms, right? And then ask yourself after, what meaning am I giving to the situation that's causing me so much pain? Okay? Now, what that will do, that question, that second question, what meaning am I giving to it, is it will take you from the emotion level to the thought level. And usually you'll have a first thought. So let's pretend, let's think of an example. Let's pretend somebody cuts you off while they're driving, okay? And you're like, this guy's a jerk, and he shouldn't have done that, okay? So let's say the meaning you give to the situation, the guy cuts you off, you feel angry or frustrated or afraid, and then you think, okay, so I feel anger and frustration, I feel it in my chest or arms, and what meaning am I giving to it? Well, that this guy's a jerk and he shouldn't have cut me off. And then you want to ask yourself, and then what does that mean, or why is that bad? Or you can ask yourself, and what am I afraid would then happen? And you keep cycling through these questions, and then you'll hit a core belief. And if you look on page 5 of your workbook, you have a chart of all the major core beliefs that are in there, okay? So you'll have them. I'm not good enough, I'm alone, I'm unloved, I am bad, I am weak, I am unsafe, I am stupid, I am unworthy, I'm helpless, powerless. I won't read them all because you guys have them. And what you'll see is that you'll hit one. So for example, you might go, the guy's a jerk, he shouldn't have done that. And then you go, okay, and what does that mean, or why is that bad? Like, why is it bad that he did it when he shouldn't have, right? Or that he's a jerk. And you might go, well, because something bad could have happened to me. And then you go, okay, and then what does that mean, or why is that bad? And you might go, well, and you can look at your chart if you'd like to, but you'll probably notice that it's like, well, I am unsafe. And if you have a wound in childhood around feeling unsafe, things like that will be extremely triggering for you. So what you're doing essentially is your emotions provide like a rope into your subconscious. They're there for you to, like, you feel these emotions and they're pretty conscious. They're almost like pre-conscious. And they're there for you to notice fully and see them, and then start pulling up. Like, they're waiting for you to go inwards and like pull up what's underneath that emotion. And so you keep asking yourself, okay, so what is the meaning I gave to the situation, right? After you've witnessed and labeled the emotion. And then what does that mean, or why is that bad, or what am I afraid could then happen? And you keep asking that second set of questions, and you'll hit that core belief. And what you're doing is you're using your emotions as the beautiful tool that they are to help you make deeply stored subconscious content conscious. So you can start to understand really why you're actually being triggered. And honestly, until you do this, you're never going to resolve an actual problem in a relationship, because you'll get into a relationship and you'll be like, I'm so mad that the person, didn't call back. And really it's not about the person didn't call back. It's that you felt abandoned emotionally by the person, and that you're afraid of losing the person. And now you don't trust the person to be emotionally safe. And until we address things at that level, we can talk all we want about the surface level symptoms of a challenge, and we are never going to get to a proper resolution. So does this make sense? So Pam, does this reprogramming, I'm just looking at the questions again. Does this reprogramming have a name? Yeah, so this isn't reprogramming yet. We're going to be going through 5 major tools for reprogramming next week. So next week is all about the reprogramming. Now, this week is just about understanding these core patterns, understanding how they impact us, where they come from, getting a really clear awareness, and then learning about what our individual belief filter is all made up of, our individual reality filter is all made up of. So we're not even touching reprogramming yet. We are going to be doing major reprogramming next week and going through all these like really specific deep tools. We're just doing this is sort of like the light level. We're just getting all the information and the analogy. So all the reprogramming processes have each individual names, but we're just not touching on those names yet. Okay, so I hope thank you for that question. That's actually a great question. So by stepping back and thinking about what I was feeling, I was able to recognize that I was reacting to the trigger, the story, and not so much of what was actually happening. Beautiful share. Is that Sandy? Yes, beautiful share. And we'll see this, Sandy, more and more, that oftentimes we are reacting so much more to the meaning we are giving to a situation as opposed to the situation itself. And then Morgan says, it makes sense to me. Can you speak about that in relation to anxious versus avoidant attachment styles? It seems that perspective might be easier for an avoidant person. And then in quotes, that being the idea that our emotions are our own to change rather than something inflicted on us by someone else. Excellent. Okay, so that's a great question. So number one, like when it comes to hunger, like we think of the hunger analogy, truly our emotions are always our emotions. The reason this feels confusing for the anxiously attached individual is because it's like this. The anxiously attached, okay, so this is such a cool question, but it's such a deep answer. So number one, remember I said earlier that we have the things that are impacting us so much are like the only reasons we emotionally suffer are because we have beliefs and thoughts that are activated or unmet needs, and that's it. And so this is what's happening, right? For the anxiously attached individual, there's a belief and thought pattern that's activated. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be abandoned. I'm going to be alone. This person, I'm not good enough. I feel rejected. You know, we've got those beliefs and thoughts that will be activated. And then underneath that, the need will usually be in relationship to other people. So the need is usually for approval from somebody else, for connection from somebody else, for safety from somebody else. And so that's why it feels like it's harder for the anxiously attached individual. But it's not actually about the story that's creating that pain. It's about the unmet need, okay? So I hope that makes sense. Think of it this way. You might be the anxiously attached individual, and then you can go, okay, I have this unmet need, and you have this like triggering experience where somebody's like not calling you back or not getting back to you, or you're supposed to meet and they're late and you're like, did something bad happen? All these things. It still works extremely effectively, maybe even more effectively for the anxiously attached individual at times, because sometimes the anxiously attached individual will tell a story about their partner's safety being threatened or their partner abandoning them. And so ideally, and this is just one high-level version of one of the 5 major reprogramming tools that we'll dive into next week, but what this original thing does is it's like this. If I can witness my emotion and go, oh my gosh, I feel really distressed or anxious. And then I can go, okay, what am I thinking or believing, or what meaning am I giving to the situation that's causing me to feel this way? And I go, I think that my partner's losing interest in me. I think that they found out that I'm not good enough for them. I hear that a lot from anxiously attached people. Or I'm afraid that something bad happened to them, that they're not safe or an accident happened. You know, underneath that story, we have that need, like I said, right? Like when I was giving that analogy of if I think somebody stole something or you know, whatever silly example I came up with. So, and when we think of what the need is in that moment, the anxiously attached person might think the need in the moment is to call their partner repetitively and incessantly and learn that they're okay and see what's going on. And that might actually push the person away. And that activating strategy might actually push a person away and deactivate the other person. But when I work through this story, I will see that the need is different than I thought that it was. So let's say I don't want to go too far down this pathway, but you know, one of the first very surface level reprogramming tools is to question the story and find proof of otherwise, which is very different than CBT for a certain number of reasons, and I'll tell you about those reasons next time, but we need to elicit that emotional response. So we might go, okay, you know, so can I 100% know that it's true that because this person didn't call me back or because they're not on time, that they're losing interest in me? Could it be something else instead? And do I in fact have proof for why they might still be interested in me and how they still do care? You know, they made the plans, and you want to find all these pieces of proof. And the reason we need the proof is because the proof elicits the emotional response. So I'll go down this rabbit hole for a moment. So let's say that we are doing affirmations, okay? And we're trying to just question a story or just affirm something. It doesn't really work. And it's because your subconscious mind speaks more through emotion than through language. So let's pretend that I come to you for a job interview and I'm like trying to tell you why you should hire me for the job. And I sit there and I say, I'm good enough, I'm good enough, I'm good enough. It's not going to do anything. I'm not convincing you of anything. But if I say I'm good enough because I have this education and this experience and this award and this, you know, these testimonials and this, you know, if I'm giving all these pieces of proof, the proof elicits the emotional response. So now you're speaking the language of the subconscious mind. And so when we say affirmations that our subconscious doesn't believe, because the subconscious speaks more through emotion than through language, the affirmations will actually work against us. So if I sit and I go, let's pretend I feel really not good enough and I'm trying to reprogram it. If I just say I'm good enough, I'm good enough, I'm good enough, my subconscious roars at me and goes, no, you're not. And then because the subconscious speaks more through that emotion than through the language, then what happens is it turns around and it reinforces that I'm not good enough instead of that I am. So affirmations can be like really counterproductive. Now, hold on to that thought, and then your subconscious mind stores every memory ever, remember? And it's colored with all of the emotion of that experience. So if I say to you, close your eyes and tell me of your favorite childhood memory, you know, you might start telling me this childhood memory, and you might start smiling, and your eyes will be closed, and your body language will open, and you'll start smiling and being happy. And it's because literally you bring up that memory and all that emotion is intact. And so the same thing works for like reprogramming. And this is one of the 5 key ways, is that in order to reprogram, we have to identify what the limiting program or thought is. We have to find the opposite, and we have to find proof, because the proof is like the memory. It elicits the emotional response. So if you feel like, oh my gosh, my partner is losing interest, and or they might abandon me, when you're able to go into it and go, hold on a second, they're abandoning me or they're losing interest. Is it true? Can I absolutely know this is true? And you're like, okay, I can't absolutely know. Let me look for proof for why this may not be true. And then maybe you think of, okay, well, my partner was really loving this morning, or my partner, you know, did make these plans to go out together, or my partner did, and you're looking for proof of otherwise. And what you'll do in that moment, or this can work as well for another typical like anxious attachment thing I'll see, is something bad happened to my partner, you know, okay, can I absolutely know that something bad happened to my partner? Could it be anything else? Oh, well, they could just be late because they're in traffic. They could have, you know, they're late often. They're not the best with managing their time. And what you're first doing is you're equilibrating the emotional responses, okay? The suffering, the storytelling that you're giving to the pain. And once you've done that, you'll feel your emotional state come down a little bit. So maybe if it was at a 9 or a 10, you might feel it come down to like a 5 or a 6, and it starts to become manageable. And then you ask yourself, okay, and what do I need in this situation to feel better? And what you'll often see if you're the anxiously attached individual is that your need goes from needing to call incessantly or reach out or cling or hold. And the need might become, I need validation that my partner really cares about me. I realized all of a sudden that I felt a little insecure this week in the relationship, and my partner was off, and I need to just know where they're at, and hey, you know, I'm feeling a little insecure, and I need a little bit of validation or reinforcement. And all of a sudden, like, these things start becoming solvable problems. So that second part with the need, when we go into the needs part of this course, you're going to learn about how to identify what the need is, and then how to communicate it in the most effective way that deeply increases your chances of getting that need met. Okay, so that's like a very high level introduction to one of the 5 key reprogramming tools. But like, we want to question a story, find proof of the opposite, and then identify the need, and then have a strategy to get the need met. Okay, it's in your workbook, but again, we're not covering this today. Today, the whole point is like to get a really clear understanding of what's going on in your subconscious, why it matters, how it happened in the first place, how you keep recreating it or upholding it, and then get like a clear picture of how to identify the core beliefs, and then how to notice the thoughts and do that belief sweep and inventory of your subconscious mind. Does that all make sense so far? I'm giving you guys tons of information. Wow. Okay, I'm just gonna read this for a moment. Okay, that's amazing. You guys are so aware. I'm so impressed. I'm constantly just like impressed by people. Okay, so Anna says, Kim, we're gonna go through. There isn't like a name. I called it like the transformation method or the reprogramming method. What I've essentially done is taken, like, I did like 16 certifications and all these different things after I finished my grad program, and I've combined a whole bunch of techniques from different places. So these are sort of my methods that I've come up with. I have to find like a really good name for them. A colleague of mine is like, you have to name your processes, but I'm not very good at naming things. If you guys have good names for these tools that are better than mine, please let me know. But we're not really starting the tool today as much. It's next week. So after next week, when you see all the reprogramming tools, if you guys have cooler names, I would love to hear them, because I have to like actually trademark them in the next couple months here. So Anna says, I recently used this exercise after a date where I felt like I had been humiliated and rejected, And later I was able to identify I had not even expressed my desire to the person from fear of rejection, and I was leaving the responsibility of communicating desire to the other person, which was unfair to them. Amazing. So powerful. Like, what a good example. And when we start to like have these awarenesses, it breaks down all these walls in between us and other people, because there's so often that we, assume that somebody's not interested because they didn't do something, or we assume that we hope that people will read our minds, and we tend to project from our perception. So if we would show up in a certain way and somebody else didn't, we tend to personalize it. But other people have different sets of programs, belief patterns, fears, all kinds of stuff. So when we start to go inwards around our emotions and question these things, it provides us with powerful breakthroughs and realizations. And then with these next tools that you'll see, you'll get these steps to like properly address these things, properly communicate these things, properly reprogram the beliefs that are creating this output in the first place. So it's a really powerful time. And that is so amazing. Wow, good job, Anna. So later we talked, I was able to say what I wanted and have give them a direct opportunity to respond, which felt so much better than leaving it up to external forces to meet my needs. So powerful. Well done. And Jesse says he resonates. And thanks for addressing my question. I'm dismissive avoidant. I think I adopt the idea that our own emotions to handle are too much. I feel like you articulated perfectly how I see my emotions, but doesn't that interfere with my attempts to find intimacy with others? I'm dismissive avoidant. I think I adopt the idea that emotions are our own to handle too much. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Sorry, I was still thinking you're anxiously attached for some reason. Okay, so our emotions, wow, great question. Our emotions are always, only ever ours to understand and handle. And once we've done that, we can then communicate our emotions to others along with our needs. So our emotions, so think of it this way, like your emotions are just yours. And it's about you going inward and working through it. And then once you've worked through it, now you can go give it to somebody else. If you haven't worked through it and deeply understood it and reflected it and understood the patterns and the reasons why, there's no sense in giving it to anybody else, because you're going to give people a jumble of all this crazy stuff. So let me give you an example. Let's say that let me think of a good analogy. Let's say that I have a dismissive avoidant partner, and so I do have a dismissive avoidant partner, but he's very secure now. But let's say that I have a dismissive avoidant partner, and let's say he forgets to pick me up for an event that we're supposed to be going to. And let's say he just goes there and forgets. And let's say I'm like, oh my goodness, he doesn't love me, he doesn't care, I'm not important, I don't matter. All these like typical things that a partner might give to that situation. I'm unworthy. When I go to express my emotions are going to come out like this. Bleh. Like they're going to come out in a mess. It's going to be unproductive. I'm going to be blaming, shaming, criticizing. I'm going to push them further away. And the whole thing is going to unravel. And so what I have to be able to do is go inside first, question my stories, right? Work through my stories, equilibrate them, then identify the need and express it. Okay, and this is like a good tool to use in real time. But again, when we've got really painful core beliefs, we have to do the deep belief reprogramming that you'll learn next week first, or not even first, but simultaneously, so that we can be more in control of our emotional state, so the feelings are not so strong, like some of you were mentioning earlier. So, and then I can find out what my need is, because it's coming from a healthy way, and then I can go get it met. And so then I might say to him, which will be highly productive, hey, earlier when you forgot to pick me up, I felt really like unwanted and like I didn't matter. I felt really small. And I really need you to be more conscious about just being aware with things like that and taking me into consideration more, because that was really hurtful. And so can you make an effort, to promise me that you'll try your best to not repeat those patterns and to be more aware and check in more often? And that will create a healthy output where you've expressed your emotions, but you've expressed your emotions from the place of pain and awareness instead of a place of suffering. Because when we're in suffering, hurt people hurt people. So when we're in suffering, we're more likely to be hurtful. So we want to process our emotions first, do that inner work, and then we can have healthy, productive conversations to be heard by others, to be seen by others, to be understood by others, and to get our needs met through others as well. I hope that answered that question. That was a fantastic question. And so that's the rule that you want to play, like Morgan, with all people, right? This is what you should try to, share with your partner or partners during life, or friends or family, and also the standard you should try to hold yourself to as well. Okay, so does this all make sense so far? Thanks, Jesse, that's awesome. Good, amazing. So here's what I'm gonna ask you guys to do this week for homework, and then we're gonna dive into like all the depths of reprogramming next week. So this week is about deeply understanding your patterns. So on page 5, you have your chart, and it says a list of negative core beliefs. I want you to go there and just write from 1 to 10 how strong those core beliefs are for you, okay? And then how to find a core belief is also on page 5. It's that exact exercise that we talked about, which is I feel triggered, and then I keep tracing the emotions backwards. What meaning am I giving to this situation? And then what would that mean, or why is that bad? And keep tracing it back to the very root core level, okay? And once you've done that, you're gonna see that you have your core beliefs. Then next week, we're gonna go into plugging those core beliefs into deep reprogramming methods and tools and strategies, so you can start unwinding all this stuff in your perceptual filter of the world that is no longer serving you. Also, on page 1 and 2, sorry, I keep saying 1 and 2, but it's technically 2 and 3 on the page numbers because you have that cover page first. Do the belief sweep, do the inventory, start getting a really clear picture of your reality filter in all those areas. This is really thorough, really in depth. And then when you come to the next class super prepared with all that stuff and really going inwards and really investigating yourself here, then you're going to be able to insert these things into all these really cool and amazing strategies to do some deep reprogramming work. And because there's 5 major ones that I'll be teaching you, you'll be able to sort of choose from whichever 5 that are most powerful to you or most meaningful to you, and you can just dive right into everything. So does that make sense to everybody right now for what was going on today, how to understand, everything that's happening? Melissa said, can we rewatch this? Absolutely. You are all going to get the recording. Thank you, Jen. Amazing. You're all going to get the recording on Monday. So basically, I just have to upload it, and then I have somebody send it out so that you'll have the recording available to you on Monday. And then you can go back, you can rewatch it. Homework is pages 2 to 5, correct? Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Pam. So yeah, 2 to 5. And also, all of our emotions are in patterns. We're going to go through this next week, but all of your emotions are in patterns. So on this page, when you've got your emotions, highlight the emotions you experience the most. You'll see that we all have our individual emotional patterning as well, where like sometimes we'll have this, like sometimes people will feel lonely and anxious, and other times somebody never feels lonely and anxious, but they feel trapped and helpless and powerless. And sometimes we'll super identify with certain sets of emotions and not others. We tend to have like 8 to 10 major emotions that we feel the most often on the negative side, because we're going to be doing some of that emotional repatterning work as well. Then this is a great space to go back and just highlight all of your emotional patterns also. Okay, and you'll see all these beautiful things come out of this and change. So I hope this all makes sense. We're going to dig right into the tools next week. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much, Sandy, for such a beautiful message. And thank you guys so much just for being here, for connecting, for sharing. Also on Monday, you will get access to the Facebook group. So if you aren't already on there, I'll send a link so that you can just connect there. And thank you, Ruby. And so you can connect, ask more questions. If you have little challenges in the homework, anything like that, you can go through and just get really, really connected. So thank you guys so much. It's been wonderful to just hear about you guys. Thank you, Jen and Kath. Thank you. And just to really get started on this path, thank you, Jesse. Have an amazing week, you guys. And also, I'm going to copy and paste all these questions. So when there was that big thing of questions I didn't get to go through earlier, because there was I think I had 68 unread comments, which is amazing because I love that everybody's so engaged. I'll go back through and just check out anything there, and I use these as inspiration for video content too. So all these things are super checked in with. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Sonomi, Maho, Kath, Katie, Olivia. Hi, Olivia. You are amazing. Okay, thank you guys so much. Have an amazing week, and I will see you guys next week. Bye. Bye. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Samsung.